Welcome to the interview. I am Ciara Pressler. This is Pregame. This is where we talk to my favorite innovators, creators, game changers, entrepreneurs, bosses, executives, and just all around awesome people. I'm very excited to welcome my friend Stephen Green today, and it is perfect timing because we are recording this on June 5th, 2020, a crazy year to begin with. But of course, this week has been particularly out of control, in control, letting go of control, however we want to characterize it. I'm sure history will have a better label for it. But, you know, I do pick my guests far in advance, so it just was kismet that Stephen is our guest for today. And so let's welcome Stephen Green. Hey, Stephen, we've got a live Zoom audience today. Stephen, let's just start with a little background. Tell people, you know, what you do, a little bio action, especially because we have some friends here who aren't necessarily in Portland, where everybody already knows you in Portland, I hope.
Great to see so many friends. My brother, Tim, I see you. So many homies out there. Marquita, I see you. Paige, Lori, Michael. Okay. What's up, Shelly? Hey, Kim. So Stephen Green, today is also my birthday. And
Happy birthday! I didn't know that.
Thank you. And
thank you for being here on your birthday.
For those that don't know, 43 years ago today, my dad had to miss a Blazer game because I was born, and it was the one day that the Blazers won the championship. So
wait, 1977, the one championship was your birthday?
Yeah.
That's Rip City.
And they were playing my dad's favorite team, the 76ers. So it was like, yeah, he was not a happy camper. But I always say I was born to live in Portland because 3 months later we moved to Portland from San Francisco, and here we are. So Stephen Green, I'm an economist by training, grew up on the west side of Portland, and a little bit in Detroit, Michigan. For the last 20 years, I've lived in Northeast Portland, in Woodlawn. And I'm pretty good at spreadsheets. Numbers are kind of my thing, as boring as that is to my kids and to most people. And you'll generally find me around the center of problem solving and trying to lift up and shine a light on, you know, mainly female founders of color, up and down the West Coast, but particularly here in Oregon, in particular Latinx and Black founders. Do a lot of work there with my partners in crime, you know, Rick and Mitch and Juan and all the homies, you know, and you as well, Ciara. So excited to be here today. I don't know where this is going to go. If you all are like me, my emotions change by the hour. And depending on the shenanigans that are happening that hour, my emotions change. So I'm excited, as everyone else is, to see where this goes.
Shenanigans. I just want a t-shirt that says shenanigans this week.
Yes.
So you're coming to us from Old Town, Puerto Rico, it looks like. Yes,
the cobblestone streets in the business district in Old Town, Puerto Rico. My mom's from Ponce, the southern part of the island. This is my favorite place in the world. I wish I was there literally right now, and hope to be there later on this summer when things get a little less shenaniganry, if that's a word.
We're just coming up with a whole new vocabulary today.
That's what I do.
So as you said in your very excellent TED Talk, you are Latino. That's how you identify. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so my mom's Latino and you know, from Puerto Rico, so Borican, and generally people in Puerto Rico are gumbo anyway. The Taino indigenous people of Puerto Rico, and then, you know, the Caribbean was the first stop of the Atlantic slave trade, and also people moving over. So people in Puerto Rico are a little bit of everything, but definitely identify as Latinx. And then my father's African American, born and raised in Detroit, Michigan.
You and I have something really interesting in common, considering we didn't meet until about 3 years ago, but we grew up like down the street down the suburban street from each other, both educated in the Beaverton School District in Oregon, an incredibly white area. We graduated the same year from rival high schools, never knew each other growing up.
Yeah, it's wild. When I graduated from Aloha, we were one of the biggest schools in the state. We had over 2,000 students, and we had 4 Black students when I got done that year in my graduating class. And then I go back and volunteer now, and they're a predominantly minority school. 40% of students there are Latinx. Over 60% of students there are kids of color. So it's wild to see how things have changed so much on the west side of town. And Beaverton School District is the school district that has the most Black students in the state.
That's so encouraging. My nephews are in Beaverton School District now, and I remember when I moved back to Portland looking at their school photo and seeing just like all colors of the rainbow. It made me so happy because Westview High School, same thing. There were like no Black people, like maybe 3 total, 3.5 including me, maybe.
Yeah.
How do you think that shaped you growing up in Beaverton, or sorry, Aloha?
My parents did that on purpose. It was really difficult for my dad transitioning out of, my dad grew up in the east side of Detroit, which to this day is not the most glamorous of places. My grandmother owns 14 houses on the same street where my dad grew up, and she's never paid more than $5,000 for a house. So that kind of tells you where things are at there. It's still one of my most favorite places on this earth, and I'm lucky to have partially been raised there. But Detroit is still the most segregated city in the country, and so you can go weeks in Detroit and never see a white person. You can go weeks in Detroit and never see a Black person. And so trying to navigate new spaces. After my dad was out of the military, he got stationed in San Francisco, and San Francisco is a really diverse place. It was a real hard transition from him from Detroit. And so I'm the youngest of 5 boys, 7 if you include my boy Tim Horn on here, and Lewis Taylor, our adoptive brothers. And he wanted all of us to make sure that we could navigate any place that we could go to. And so my parents thought, Aloha in the 80s and 90s was the exact opposite of East Detroit. And so if we were both comfortable and able to navigate East Detroit, but also Aloha, then anywhere else we moved would be somewhere in the middle. And so, I think, high school was horrible. I hated high school. I really struggled with depression. Suicide was a very real thing for me, coming of age as an adolescent. And if it wasn't for my family, that probably would have happened. But now looking at it as an adult, like it really shaped who I am and my ability to navigate different rooms. And I do it with ease. You can put me in an all white room. You can put me in a rural room. You can put me in the big city, and I'm always at ease. And I think it's because I grew up with this innate sense of always being present and always reading people. And I'm always still to this day hypersensitive of going into a room and being able to read, if someone's 20 feet away from me, if they're comfortable with my presence in that room or not. And so I look at that as an asset, even though it is a stressor. I do understand why people that look like me generally die a little earlier in life, because we are dealing with those kind of stresses.
Yeah, I identify with that a lot. I loved high school because I just perform well in like very structured environments, but college was very difficult for me. I think it was more of like my world got smaller rather than expanding, because I went to a very conservative Christian college, which was very white. The only Black people were on the basketball team. But I obviously have a much lighter skin tone than you, and being a woman, some things are treated differently. But certainly a lot of my privilege comes from growing up in a very white area, and to speak the language and to blend in to different situations. Like all I have to do is straighten my hair for people to like glance towards me. No, seriously. And that is a tool that I use sometimes, not really anymore in my life because I'm over it. But also when I moved to New York, it was that culture shock of like, oh, people have seen all kinds of people before, and like they're just used to being around all types of people. And, you know, some people saw me as Latina, because that's often where we file people who are ambiguous. You know, some people saw me as Black, some people saw me as white. So there was a lot of like eye of the beholder there.
Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating how many things we take on to rationalize our existence and to rationalize our place in like our friends group or whatever. And so, you know, high school for me was just really odd, having two college educated parents. All of my brothers went to historically Black colleges, not on the West Coast. And so once they were gone, and I'm the youngest by 4 years, it was a really tough transition. And instead of going to a HBCU, I got a full academic scholarship to a school in Oregon. And it was fascinating to leave my high school, because once I was in college, I didn't know how bad I was feeling until I got there, and I didn't feel that angst anymore. I lived with 5 Black roommates. We had our own house in college, and it was a really safe place, and I had no idea that I needed it until I was there. And I think, you know, one of the things looking back on like high school was like, you know, yeah, there was a lot of the N-word, and I could have fought every week if I wanted to, but also there was just a lot of just not being seen. And I think, you know, one of the things that's coming up for me in this, whatever we're going through right now, is I don't want people to associate with, you know, because they don't use the N-word or because they don't see color, that's not the same as saying I want to see Stephen and Ciara shine. Like I want to see them thrive. And you know, I think that's one of the things that a lot of people have kind of leaned back on, is like, I'm not as bad as so and so, or I don't actually wear a pointed white cap. But that's very different than really, you know, leveraging your platforms and your privilege to see other people shine and thrive. And it's exciting to see more of those conversations. But you know, I remember at Aloha when I graduated, the same week I got awarded my academic scholarship to college, all the graduating seniors had to meet with a graduation counselor. And so it was just like an exit interview, your last couple weeks of school. And I sat down with this woman who was a counselor at the school, and I had never met with her before. She had my transcripts in front of her, and she just had one question for me. And she was like, "Where are you going to work next year?" And you know, I was 17. I didn't know anything, and I was like, "Well, you know, if like I need to get a job on campus, like, hey, help me figure that out. But like, I'm gonna be busy. I'm playing a sport." And she was like, "Oh, wait, you're going to college?" And I was like, "Well, yeah. Like my mom would kill me if I didn't go to college." Like,
Wow.
in fact, I got a full ride. Like, you know, school was paid for. And I just remember like the shock and awe on her face. And that really kind of that stuck with me. That really stuck with me, because that was just not on her radar at all.
So going through college, having more of a community that you felt part of, how did that shape, you know, your career direction? What was the next step?
You know, going to college, I was able to, you know, I went to Western Oregon University. There wasn't a ton of kids of color there, but you know, it was my first time being around a lot of like Black and brown academics. And so, you know, I'd always hidden from the academic side of things. Like I would hide my book bag from my friends in high school. You know, I played football and other sports in high school because that's what you do when you're the big Black kid to fit in. Because if you don't, you're going to be ridiculed and othered and stuff. But I didn't.
Isn't that a shame in the Black community? Within the Black community, it can be seen as acting white to get an education or be educated.
Well, you know, I think it would have been different if I was at a place like Jefferson, where there was a more broader existence of Black roles and Blackness, right? Like you can be a Black band geek at Jefferson and other schools, but when your identity is really revolves around what other people think of you, and those other people are all mainly white, well-to-do or blue-collar kids, they tell you what your role is, right? And so, you know, I've pretty much been the same size since I was 12 years old. And so, you know, when you're 6 feet and 200 pounds, you're like, oh, you do sports. Like sports has to be your thing. and so, you know, I played that role, right? But I was always fascinated by numbers. I made spreadsheets as a little kid with my baseball cards and football card collection. Like that's how I tracked the value of them, and made predictions on what they were going to be worth months to come. And I had no idea, but I was just like, numbers always, you know, were cranking in my mind. And so it's natural that I did those things. And I had two parents that were also entrepreneurs. I saw my mom start a tech company in the 90s and raise venture capital. You know, my dad started a program at Intel in the 80s that exists today, where they bring engineers from historically Black colleges to Intel every summer, right? And so I was always surrounded by these things, but then I'd leave my home, and it was a completely different world, and there was different expectations of me. And so getting to college, like that was over, so to speak. And so you know, I got involved with a Latinx mentoring program where college students would go and mentor Latinx kids at Salem area high schools. And it was awesome, and I was comfortable, and I found other people that looked like me, that were doing things that I was secretly interested in, that now it was okay to be interested in those things. And so you know, in college, that's where I really kind of came into my own, started my first business in college, slanging shoes on this thing called eBay. My dad was my first investor after he realized I was crushing it. And I paid for my last 2 years of college, like selling shoes on the internet. Like it's wild.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so funny. There's several people I'm still best friends with from high school, and you were like in college with them, and like in high school and junior high with them, and like I never met you till 3 years ago. It's just funny.
Yeah.
I'm curious, were you liberated in your mind about what Black and brown people could be that early? Because I will tell you, I internalized so much of what was put on me by white culture that I'm still dismantling so much of it. You know, like what I said, you know, for Black women, the hair thing's a big thing. You know, you don't see white women going to the salon to get frizzy hair or wearing wigs to get frizzy hair. Like until we see that, we haven't reached equality. You know, like what the standards of beauty. I never felt beautiful until I moved to New York, because the society did not, because I didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes. So I did not have that liberation until my 20s, and I'm still getting there at 41.
Yeah. No, you know, my parents were always, you know, I had Black and brown people in my house 24/7. And one of the great things about growing up on the West Side was if we were at the store or at the park and we saw somebody who looked Black or brown, like that was instant family. And so, you know, we normalized that growing up. And so I've got cousins and aunts and uncles that have known me since I was in diapers, that are family, but they're not blood. And I thought that was a normal thing until I met my now wife in college. And I remember, you know, I brought her home to go to an event and like hang out with the family. And I was like, oh, this is cousin Mikey, and this is my Uncle Van. And she was like, oh, okay, cool. So is that your mom's side or your dad's side? And I was like, well, what are you talking about? Like, they're not blood, but they're family. Like, what do you mean? And she was just like, what? And that's, you know, really being with her is really, you know, brought into like full view, like the amazingness of both, you know, my parents and how intentional they were about that work, but also just like the amazing, you know, way that our community navigates different things. And it's funny, like the natural things that I do if I'm in different places. So like in Portland, I give the nod. If I see someone Black, I give them the nod. And that's, you know, if you don't do that and I'm walking, I will say, like, we're in Portland, you give the nod. I don't do that if I'm in New York or I'm in Detroit. Like in Detroit, the nod will get you in trouble. But it's fascinating how I don't even think about that. Like I just automatically know, like, oh, I'm in Pacific Standard Time. Like we're doing the nod today.
For those of you who are white, the nod is a signal that Black people give to each other to acknowledge each other in public.
Yes. And I never knew really what that was. It was just something that we always did. And it wasn't until my girlfriend at the time, now wife, we were at the mall in Salem, and we were holding hands, having a good old time, being 21. And she like got upset and was like, "Why are you ashamed of me?" And I was like, "Wait, what?" And she was like, "Well, whenever you see your black friends, like you never introduce me. Like, what's up with that?" And I was like, man, like I was really shook. I was, I, whoa, like when did I do that? My bad. And she, well, upstairs when we saw that guy, you said hi to him, you didn't even introduce me. And I was like, oh, well, I gave him the nod. I don't know that fool. Like, I gave him the nod. And she
I
was like,
love that story.
yeah, she was like, huh? And I was like, well, honey, imagine everywhere you go, it's just dudes. Like it's just sausage fest everywhere. And then you're in a crowded room with all the dudes, and there's a lady there. Like you're gonna give her the nod. She may not be your girl. Like you may not kick it, but you're gonna acknowledge that she's in that same space with you, and then keep pushing. And then that was it. That was the one time we had that conversation, and then I was like, oh, it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
I grew up in a white family, and there's something lost there about learning about Black and Brown culture and internalizing positive messages. And, it's like I had to go then and educate myself after college in a lot of these things. I think it's interesting.
yeah.
Let's fast forward into your career, because that's how I know you is from your resume. So you were in banking for a while. Give us a little resume overview, and please don't be as humble.
Yeah. So right out of college, 9/11 was had happened. And so a number of friends and we all applied for the FBI actually, right after 9/11. But the background check time was taking 2 years at that point in time for people to get into service. And so in between my background check happening, I got involved in securities. And so I got my securities licenses and got on with a broker dealer. And again, it was more numbers, and like, I loved it. But it was limiting in that I could only talk to people about their investments and their personal stuff. And there was this whole other world of business that I didn't get to insight into, but it plays into their financial picture. And so after leaving that broker dealer, I went and did investments for a local area bank, US bank, and did investments on that side. And I naturally gravitated towards working with people that were founders. And I loved being able to look at everything and understand how their insurance for their business impacted different things, and understand their profit margins and how they use cash, and short-term money versus long-term money, and being able to how freeing it was to ask someone like, well, what do you want to do, and then I'll make a plan for you to get there. Like, but you have to tell me what's important. And they were just like, wow, I never knew that was an option. Like, I thought you just show up every day and you work hard and things happen. And I was like, no. And so, in doing that, I worked for the biggest bank in Oregon, which is Bank of the West. And also one of the smallest banks in Oregon. And I was on a leadership team for Albina, what was then Albina Community Bank. And then when things got tough post 2008, I went and worked for the city of Portland for 7 years. And it was, I'll never forget, in my interview to work at PDC, one of my good friends now, Art Hendricks, he was on the interview panel, and he said, when I asked what's it like to work at the city, he said, well, we're always thinking about getting ready to do something, but we never quite do it. And I sat back and I was like, that doesn't make no damn sense at all. All these years later, it makes complete sense. And so, I learned a ton being inside, working at PDC, we had brain surgeons there. We had former Navy SEALs that worked at PDC. It was definitely a place where I was surrounded by so many amazing people, including Shelly, who I see here, that had so many different backgrounds. But it was also limiting in that, our world was defined around being reactive, right? Like waiting around and seeing what, the mayor's office was going to say, or a city councilor. And I had always wished that we could always be a little more proactive, and be focused on, long-term relationship building, as opposed to the 2 and 4 year increments of political change.
Yeah, so that PDC is the Portland Development Commission. It's been rebranded to Prosper Portland. Can you help people? I mean, I know a lot of people on this Zoom are engaged, but I think, you know, myself included, don't fully understand the scope of Prosper Portland. I mean, that's where our tax money goes through to business, right?
Not exactly.
Okay, see? Educate us.
So, you know, the important thing is Prosper was created as a quasi city bureau, that it wasn't a real estate organization. And so most of Prosper's revenues come from what's called tax increment finance. And that's governed by state statute. And basically it's a financial tool where money goes into property taxes. The city goes and takes off of future property taxes in the form of like a big credit card analogy. And then Prosper uses that to help increase the property tax base in the future for specific parts of the city. Per state statute, Prosper can only have these urban renewal areas in 15% of the city. And so, you know, that means 85% of the city can't get access to the bulk of their programs. And that's by state statute. That's not like the mayor can change his mind or city council can vote on it. They are governed by ORS 457 around that. And so I had a ton of experience prior to going there in real estate development. But once I was there about 4 years in, we decided to switch over to doing economic development, which is really much more people, but the tools remain the same. So we had a little bit of money from general fund, but the analogy I always think about is, you know, imagine being a really good electrical company, and then someone comes in one day and says, okay, now we do plumbing. We're doing plumbing going forward. And it's like, well, yeah, you can say that, but still, I've got all these electricians here, and they're pretty good at doing electrical work. But now you're asking them to be plumbers, and now you're going to market everything as plumbing, and our tools, they aren't, you know, electrical stuff. So this is going to be tough. And so that's part of the angst is it's been rebranded as economic development, but by and large, the tools that they have hamstring them to doing, you know, real estate related things in 15% of the city, by and large. And so in doing that, you have to be really, really creative. You have to be really, really good at economic development to be able to draw those connections, to be able to say, hey, if we invest in this building through tax increment finance, here's how we can provide a benefit to communities. All the while, there's federal laws and regulations around procurement and how you can utilize certified firms. And certified firms are not Black-owned businesses. That's actually a separate designation. And so, you know, I think rightfully so in this time that we're in right now, it's easy for someone to say, hey, Prosper, you should go and deploy money to Black-owned businesses and focus it there. Well, legally, they can't do that. It's a great idea. And I think everyone agrees with the spirit of that, but legally, there's a lot of, you know, stuff that's transpired at the federal level, state level, that they can't legally do that with the tools that they have. And so it's been amazing to see people like Cupid Alexander, who's now at the mayor's office, come up with ways to navigate those legal realities. And so one of the ways that I thought's really great that's happened in the past 5 years is the preference policy that the city has around being able to use affordable housing in Northeast Portland. So instead of calling out specifically Black people, which would be illegal, you know, Cupid created a framework that incentivized and gave extra points to people that lived in a certain area, which is completely legal and a way to do it. It just so happened that before 1990, 80% of the state's Black population lived in 2 zip codes. And so, you know, if you find someone who's lived in an area before 1990, by and large, chances are they were Black. And so that was a very creative way to do that. But that's hard to do, and that takes a special amount of experience. And so, you know, their work is never easy. But right now we have to we need all hands on deck to find actual things that definitively, you know, close the wealth gap and really benefit specifically Black businesses.
This is something I really admire about you, and something I think people need to pay more attention to. You know, I'm somebody who falls in both camps of like burn it down and like learn the game, get in the game to change the game, right? And
Yeah.
so, I think we're all quick to say like, support Black and brown founders, support women-owned businesses, like put more money toward that and all of it. But, say Business for a Better Portland sends a letter to the governor that she needs to do more of that. You are somebody who's actually reading the letter of the mechanics they propose to do that and giving back some criticism of like, this actually wouldn't work. So I think, it's difficult when our knee-jerk reaction is, of course, to support the idea of something, but the mechanics of how that actually happens in reality can be different, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my mind always goes to problem solving, and so I naturally, I'm an emotional being, but my mind, when a letter like that comes out, is to break it down into pieces and think about, well, where are the barriers along the way, whether it be on the public sector side or on the business owner side, right? And so, one of the things happening right now is PPP became available, right? Well, PPP is just another form of the SBA's 7A loan program, right? So, and that program is a guarantee program. So none of this $700 billion that the government said they were giving, none of that goes to these lenders. So all these lenders are lending their own money. And then if those loans fail, then if they followed all the rules, then the SBA will make them whole on the back end. But they're not getting any of this $700 million other than fee income. And so that's a very important detail when it comes to how that money goes out. And the data that we have, last year there was 4 SBA 7A loans to Black businesses in the whole state, a state of more than 5,000 Black businesses, 4. And so to just go and say, well, PPP is available, go and get it. Well, these business owners already know, like their experience has been, well, we don't get 7A loans. So why, in a really, really emotional time where I don't even have a relationship with this bank, why would I go and do this? Like, the data is out there. I love a lot of the stuff that Umpqua is doing and a lot of the people that are over there. But when you look at the data, like they've recorded 1 SBA loan for a Black business in the last 10 years, right? And so if I'm a Black business owner and my experiences have been that, XYZ bank won't lend to me, why would I all of a sudden think that I'm gonna be able to get PPP? And it just exacerbates the already emotional state. And so that's why all this comes back to relationships, not outreach, not handouts, not, sprinkling it on when you feel like it, but like a long-term approach of like, okay, if you're always having trouble with XYZ community, like hire someone from that community, like bring them in, because there's only an us, right? Like if they're always blowing up the spot, like go to the spot and say, hey, we want to work with you, because like we're committed to this. And so that's tough to hear when your world is generally 2 and 4 year increments, right? And relationships take a long time. Yeah, they do. I'm sorry, like that's life, and that's not my fault. Like y'all broke stuff. And so it's I feel like the moment is shifting a little bit where people now understand having a Black Lives Matter sign is not enough. Like you have to actually do things that show Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Because we've talked about, because I know people want to hear the behind closed doors stuff, but you and I talk about the peculiar form of liberalism that is Portland, Oregon. And, there's a lot of Black Lives Matter signs in yards, but not a lot of action necessarily.
So we'll go there. We'll go there.
Okay.
I'll give an example from this week. So myself and Rick on here and a few other people are involved with an organization called Built Oregon. And, ever since, we started Built years ago, we've always been front and center about inclusion and the work that involves. And that's work. It's not like it's done. It's not like we always do it great, but it's always at the center of whatever we do. And so, recently we have a big group of mentors, and a mentor sent out an email this week. And this was a white female mentor, and she made some huge claims about Built and that it was a racist organization, and we have to deconstruct white supremacy, and there's you know, the only people that we include that are people of color are tokens, and it's very tokenizing. And I counted in that email there were 62 I's, and it just so happened that I received the email as I was writing emails to 3 minority founders that we were giving grants to that she knew nothing about. And my shit. I'll just be honest. And so I wrote an email back being like, you know, why didn't you just call me? Like, this email could have been, hey, I'm struggling with my feelings about how Built shows up for communities of color and how what Built is doing is in alignment with my personal values. Let's have a conversation about that. But instead, there were 62 I's. You know, I was called a token. We have a program that helps minority-owned businesses solely get into stores, into the New Seasons of the world, Whole Foods, all that. And that program was my idea. And she said it was someone else's idea, and it wasn't. And this was just all from her. And so I wrote a response back being very clear that you made this all about you, and you shit on what my work has been and the impact that I know that we've had, and you didn't even give me the courtesy of like calling me. And so, you know, I thought that was that. She replied back and said, I didn't mean to include you on that email to 6 people. And so then doubled down on a lot of her statements. And so I responded back and I was like, so let me get this right. So I don't even fucking exist. Like, you just erased me from being. So we're crapping on my work, and then Stephen doesn't even exist. But you're right. And I was like, hey, I can't. I got to step away from the computer on this one. And I think, you know, this is about committing to work. It's not about being right. It's not about doing things the right way all the time. It's about, you're either committed to the work or you're not committed to the work. And not committing to the work is doing things like pledges, right? Like, that is not committing to the work, right? That's committing to marketing and things that make us comfortable. But the work is centering the experiences and outcomes for people that you want to have an impact with, period. That's what the work is.
And not doing PR about it to say, look how awesome I am.
Hey, you know what? I think there's a place for that, but I don't think that should be your motivation, right? Because I also sit down with a lot of great allies who they feel paralyzed by their guilt and their whiteness, as opposed to, you didn't earn your privilege, right? And we've all got it. Leverage the hell out of that privilege. Mm-hmm. So if you're a straight, white, rich dude that can get a meeting with somebody that I can never get a meeting with, hell yeah. Like, we need that on the team, right? But for you to use that as a cop-out for why you haven't done anything and why you've never had to be uncomfortable, that's what I call bullshit on, right? And
well,
so,
what I'm talking about specifically is these guys, you know who I'm talking about, who say in their Twitter bio, they're white males who say in their Twitter bio or somewhere else that they're diversity experts. Yeah. Which, yeah, I know that certain white guys are only going to listen to them and they should have those conversations, but I do not think they should appoint themselves experts in diversity because they went and got a haircut at a black barber shop once. I think that's counterproductive. Because behind the scenes, they are not helping Black people. They're not funding things. I know other people who have specifically asked them for money or sponsorship for, you know, Black designed, Black hosted events, and they are not showing up. Meanwhile, they're getting editorials in national publications talking about how woke
they asked for, right? This isn't that the editorial came to them, but they asked, hey, can I tell you how great I am about diversity? And again, the work is messy at times, right? Like, you know, I see Amanda from OEN here, and like, I've been very outspoken about, I think, the opportunity for OEN to step up, and very critical. You know, their last 2 events, there hasn't been, you know, people that won awards that were people of color. And to Amanda's credit,
to be fair, Amanda was not the director.
No, totally. But also, Amanda may not have been responsible, but she sure as hell is accountable. And look who's right there, sitting there taking those hits, right? And that's part of the work, right? Part of the work is being like, hey, I'm going to continue to show up. And sometimes I'm going to fuck up. Sometimes I'm going to miss the mark. But guess what? I'll be here next Monday. And that's all that you can ask of people, right? Is to continue to show up, and because the work is going to change. And I think one of the things that I really hope doesn't come out of this moment is that people that are joining this work for the first time think it's a check the box, or we get to a certain mark. There is no done, right? Like there is no I don't get to tap out at any point in time. You don't get to tap out at any point in time. And so you either commit to that and whatever that may mean for the next decades, or you sit your ass on the sidelines and you don't do anything, right? And that's why this will be an interesting moment, because I don't say a lot about organizations that don't put diversity up front, right? The tech pledges put diversity up front, right? And if you are a private organization, you can do whatever the hell you want to do. But the second you start trying to talk about your diversity cred, guess who's going to come and say, well, what are you doing about that? Like, show me the receipts, right? And so, TAO came in and did some statements this week about Black Lives Mattering. Guess who's going to have some good tweets for them in a month when I'm asking about, show me how that shows up? Because the same day that they were talking about Black Lives Matter, they did an all-white male panel discussion on whatever, right? And so that we're going to have those conversations now, and I'm going to be unequivocal about it, right? Because we're at that point, and there's thankfully enough straight white privileged men that are also at that point where they're just like, nah, not today, not anymore, not working the edges, not this soft ass bullshit. And same thing goes for some people of color in the community that have, gravitated to DEI work to make money on it, right? Like either you're doing this work to help the community and help other people, or you're doing it to center yourself. Anyone who's trying to center this around themselves, we're going to have some conversations.
Yeah, I agree with you. If you are a public organization, this has to be an integral part of your mission and your actions. If you are a private business and you say that your values include diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're going to hold you accountable to that. If you don't say it, we're not going to check you on it as hard, but it's because it's trendy for these usually white male like tech business owners to look woke. They're going to put a black square in their social media, but we're not seeing investments in actual diversity work.
And you got to do it from the standpoint of centering the experiences of folks, right? And like the biggest example of that I can give is, we've gotten really comfortable right now in a lot of work around bringing in apprentices and interns, right? That's where the avenue for people of color has become. And it's based on two pieces of implicit bias. One, there isn't talented, capable people older than them, right? And two, this is what I'm comfortable with, right? And so here's the problem with that from an experiential standpoint. If I'm a young 21-year-old LGBTQ identifying person, and I come into an organization and I'm the only one there, or maybe the only other person is also an intern with me, you're telling me from my first day, I can't be in middle management here. I can't be in leadership. So why would I stay, right? So now that person is there for, 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, and then they leave. And then when they're in their community and someone says, hey, I'm thinking about applying at the place where you're intern at, they're gonna be like, nah, you're good, right? And then that application doesn't come in, and then that feeds the implicit bias of they don't exist. As opposed to, no, that community's already written you off because you've done really dumb shit, right? And so what if they started from the standpoint of, well, they exist, they just don't apply for us and we're getting in our own way, right? So why not work with the Oregon chapter of Black engineers, the Oregon chapter of Black Latinx engineers, and talk to them about why doesn't our company come up when you have folks looking for a job? Because they'll tell you, right? Like you go to them, they're gonna be like, okay, You want the smoke? We'll give you the smoke, right? But to go and work the edges and you know, go and flaunt your 6 Black interns around at events, it's virtue signaling at the least, right? But from the, if you're someone who's focused on experiences, you've given that those young people a crutch, right? Like you've just told them like this ain't the spot for you, and that's horrible, right? Like, you know, my brother Tim's on here right now, and Tim's almost 50, and you know he's CIO CTO material, right? But you know, you talk to the Tech Pledge folks, and Tim doesn't exist, even though he's been here 30 years. And so I think that's the opportunity for the organizations that already exist, because at the end of the day, like I shouldn't have to do pitch black, right? Like organizations that already exist, that already have their platform, should be able to go and say like, wow, there's 5,000 Black businesses here. That's a business opportunity. That's an opportunity for us to engage with a whole new segment of the community that we haven't done before. Boom, great, that's happening.
This makes me think of the phenomenon that you've highlighted. You know, a lot of our areas anchored around Nike and Intel. And sure, Nike will recruit, you know, Black employees from other cities and move them here, but they're gone within 2 years because their family is living in a super white area, or because Nike isn't doing enough to build up the Black community around Nike. And so it doesn't become a friendly place necessarily for their kids to go to school. What is that your take on it?
You know, I contracted with Nike for over 10 years. You know, I grew up a mile away from campus. And I think, you know, Nike's big thing is they're Nike, right? If they have a position open, they're getting 20,000 applications for it, no matter what, right? Everyone does it. Them being in Beaverton and the commute, that hasn't historically impacted them. And the reason why people leave is not because of necessarily, most of the time, their personal experience inside the berm, as they call it at Nike. It's their significant other, right? Like when they got onboarded, no one told them the difference between Tualatin and Tigard and St. John's and Northeast Portland and downtown, right? Because they just look at it from a map from coming from Chicago or wherever, and they're like, wow, that's like right next to downtown. Like we're good. How different could it be? Oh, it can be very different, right? And so when that person leaves, they're like, oh, Ciara couldn't hack it working on that team. It's like, no, Ciara's partner never found a barber. Ciara's partner never found a church home, right? Ciara's partner, you know, wanted to be part of something that they just never found. And Ciara just gave up having that fight. And it was easier to leave than to continue to have that fight. And so the opportunity for the Nikes of the world, and the same thing happens for Intel and Adidas and OHSU, is it's not that they don't do amazing work and have really, really innovative people, is that they lose top-notch talent because top-notch talent has options, right? And if it's Black, white, or otherwise, if my partner's not feeling it, I got 4 other companies that are asking me to go wherever we want to go, where he or she or they are going to be comfortable. Let's bounce, right? And it's such a missed opportunity, as opposed to going and saying, hey, as Nike, we're gonna work with a third party, and all they do is they talk to our new onboarded employees about living in the Portland area, right? Because like maybe they don't know that they're 60 minutes from the coast. Maybe they don't know about the hikes and the nature, or maybe they got here in the winter and they don't know about the amazing summers here, right? And maybe they've never connected with community. You know, I run a group called The Gathering. You know, all this is Black men from around the region. We get together in the Pearl, at the oldest Black-owned business in the Pearl, and we do that every month. And you know, it's been happening for over 10 years. And at one point, we thought about like, do we do programming and stuff? They don't need programming. People that, because we're all living in this place together, and they just want to go and spend 2 hours in an environment where they don't have to question their existence. They're not going to get silly questions. They're not going to get silly looks. They can take off their code switching and just be, right. And that recharges the batteries. And so what would it look like for, you know, Nike to go and say, wow, this is such a valuable tool for our employees, right? We're going to go and make sure that this can happen in a more authentic way, that also people can follow up, right? So like I do a lot of follow-up emails and stuff with the people that are part of it. So instead of just the one event, like you're creating community. And then people are able to go and ask, hey, my partner's looking for a place to get her hair braided. Like, you got me? Oh, I got you. Talk to so-and-so, tell them you talk to me, right? And those things don't cost money, really. So same thing for the tech companies, right? Like, they're all doing great work, but they're getting in their own way. And at some point they have to get to a standpoint of, it's us, not them, as opposed to it's them. They can always meet us where we're at.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think, with everything that's happened with COVID, having to go virtual and everything, it's been a time to reevaluate every part of life and business, especially for those of us who are business owners. And, I've been back in the Portland area for 6 years now, and I'm thinking again about, like, do I double down on my investment in this city, or do I go to another city where I don't experience some of the problems that I experience here? And my situation's a bit different. I don't have kids in school. I don't have a partner. But, going back to a situation where, I get tokenized sometimes, which I didn't experience in New York City, or where I don't get to go to very many Black spaces unless you're in the know, like I could just go to LA or Atlanta or Chicago and just solve that problem.
Yeah. I think also, we have people of color moving from those places every day to Portland, right? So, the illusion that I can just go somewhere where there's more Black people or more brown people and things will be solved is just not the case. Like, people are just looking for community, right? And community can be found in places where you have the nod, right? Like, that's its own little, community secret sauce that we have here. And so, yeah, I think about people like yourself. I think about Paige and her husband, Darren, and their young son. Like, I don't want to lose them, right? Like, we need them, but we also have to acknowledge as a community, like, they're not seen, right? Like, who talks about Black men who run technology companies, right? Like, that's not something that comes to the tip of our tongue oftentimes. Who talks about, Black women helping companies around the world raise millions of dollars, which is what Paige does. Like, no one puts that on the tip of their tongue because it doesn't exist, right? But here she is, doing it, doing the work, traveling the country from right here in Portland. And that comes to one of the pieces of, like, why I wanted to create Pitch Black. And it's just because, like, I see all these amazing people and narratives, and folks just don't know they exist, right? Like, we've got a Black man who grew up in North Portland who started a drone company and worked at NASA, and his dad was a Tuskegee Airman, and, like, he does it from here. Like, how could people not know he exists? And so, doing an event where he flew one of his drones into the room was, like, amazing, right? And he also drives a DeLorean. So come on, tons of cool points there.
I like that. So we're almost out of time here. We're never out of time for you, really, Stephen. We could have you here every week. And Stephen is here every week because he's a pregame coach too. So you could join pregame and work with him. But Stephen, I want to know, what is making you optimistic right now? Who's doing it right? What makes you hopeful about Black and brown people, about business, about our community?
At the end of the day, I think there's always hope. I'm heartened by the people that have already been committed to the work before this. People like Brian Steelman at Porque No, Emma over at Wild Fang. We just need more people to commit to the work, and I see that change happening, and I see people being emboldened by figuring out what their role is, even if that role just may be like, hey, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna shop at a Black business or a Latinx business or a woman-owned business, once a week, and that's what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna cheat on Starbucks and get my coffee once a week at whatever place. It could be that small, right? It could start there. It doesn't have to be like the big innovative idea. Change is grains of sand at a time, that when enough people do it and you do it over enough time, you look back and it's a mountain, but no one ever moves a mountain, right? Like, we all move these grains of sand. And so, find your grain of sand, right? And then share that with someone and tell someone else, and see us. right? Like really, really see us. And if you're not seeing us, assume we exist and assume you're doing something or you're going places where we're not. But go and find us, because we out here, aren't we, Makita? We're out here. We've been out here. And you know, we're not going anywhere. Like I'm gonna die here. I'm gonna be buried here. I'm gonna continue to travel a bunch, but like Portland's an amazing, amazing place with all of its imperfectness and warts and all. And because I'm gonna stay here, that means I'm gonna be in people's ass, and that's just the way it is. I feel ownership over Portland, just like anybody anywhere else. You know, find somebody else who was born when the Trailblazers won the championship, right? And so, you know, that's what gives me hope. You know, traveling more really, you know, makes me love Portland more and more. And I do spend a good amount of time in other cities, but this will always be home. And it's because of many of the people that you see on the screen.
Well, before I start crying, we're going to have to wrap this up. Stephen, thank you so much. You are a gem of Portland and a total gift to our community and everyone you influence. So I cannot thank you enough for all that you do. You guys, Stephen puts out so much energy all the time. Take care of him. Make sure you check in with him. Don't just ask him for stuff. Give back to him as much as you can. And thank you. Thanks, Stephen, for being here. Thank you. I'm going to go meet with the mayor now. We'll talk a little different conversation. All right, game on.
I spit it cold like lyrically I'm a problem. That's when the show starts. I get it, live it, I did it.